We've got to move this industry forward. We have to break down the silos between developers and designers and contractors. Like, we're literally designing and building and shaping communities and the planet.
Thanks, Ian. Did anyone else agree we needed Lion King theme music when Rachel stopped running up? All right. Sean, how's it going?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry. This is my bad side, and I don't know how I'm going to deal with that, but I'm going to rotate some. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first question, Sean, how did you wind up here?
Oh, good. Well, so I have some illustrations. I was up late last night and had an illustrator help me out, so I'll flip through some. But I wanted to start with, let me see here, not that one, this one. So April 9th, 2018, couple years in, 2.5 years into the creation of XBE, was on a trip down to Kansas City, Missouri. I lived in Chicago at the time. We're going to be talking about the founder's journey, the hero's quest, whatever we call it, and we were somewhere in the beginning part of the abyss of that journey at the time. So I was in Kansas City dealing with some challenges, and before my phone rang, and the phone rang, I picked it up, and it was a colleague that had just gone to our office, and he said, "Hey, do you know why there would be 7 bullet holes in the front of the office this morning?" And I said, "No, I didn't have any scheduled, so I'm not sure, but I think it may have something to do with the negotiation we've been in the middle of with dump truck owner-operators in Kansas City. So you call the police, and I'll be back in a few hours." And the reason I tell that story is that the next day, I called around Chicago and looked for some office space. Now, a smarter man would have just gone to WeWork, but not me. I called around, looked for someone that had space, and Built Worlds, who is a company focused on building community for the built world, a friend of mine said, "You know, they have a little bit of space in the back of their office. I think that they may be interested in renting out." And so the next day, I rented a U-Haul. The team packed up the whole office from the shot up ridiculous situation that was going on. We drove over and moved in. Now, for 2 weeks straight, I saw Nick, or rather Nick saw me walking back and forth in this office, not paying attention to my surroundings whatsoever, because he happened to work in the same office. And it wasn't in the office that he introduced himself, but on the street while I was out running, and he said, hey, I don't want to be that guy, but I see you every day at the office, and now I'm out working out, and you're out working out, and I just feel like we should know each other. That's how I found my way here. That's the long way of saying. So total serendipity that I met Nick back when XBE was just a nascent company, sort of struggling through its most difficult day. Nick happened to work in the same industry. I didn't even know that. And then fast forward a bunch of years, XBE ends up a success. Nick ends up a success also. Were you in the abyss at the time too? I don't remember.
A little bit, yeah.
So Nick was also in the abyss in 2018. But anyways, it's fun to be here, and you never know how life's going to go.
So to distill that answer, I picked up Sean on a street corner in Chicago, and now we're good friends. He's an investor. Everything's great.
Yeah.
So you briefly mentioned XBE in your company. The title of this conversation is The Founder's Journey. So we want to explore all of the aspects of your journey from starting the company to selling it. Do you mind just giving a brief overview of what XBE does, the type of tech company it is, and then also, I'll actually say the second part of this question. That'll be
good. Let's see if I can get this right. Any idea how I go backward? There we go. Okay, so XBE is in the horizontal construction space, and I have 3 little images to talk about. So one way of thinking about horizontal construction is to zoom way down into the folks that are building the roads, right? That's the paver operator, the screed operator, the lead man on the job, the dump truck driver that's driving to the job site, the plant operator that's mixing the asphalt. And one thing that XBE is we're the tool that those individuals, the hundreds and hundreds of people in a given city, use to get their instruction about what they're going to do the next day, communicate about a dangerous situation that they encounter, enter their time, see what they're going to get paid. So we are an operating system that is touching the blue collar, horizontal construction labor force that's out building the roads in the biggest cities in the country. That's part of what we are. Mm-hmm. The next thing we are is the platform that the management of those organizations and the owners of those roads are using to figure out how it all fits together, right? How to coordinate all the trucks from all the different companies, inbound materials from quarries, balance demand across 8 asphalt plants, to figure out how to deal with cold weather, whether to work at nights, whether to work on weekends, sort of to look out, survey the situation, and balance resources to optimize the whole operationally. And there's another way to look at what we do, and that zoomed out seeing a city and its lifespan, its growth, its changes as a way to make money through building and maintaining its infrastructure and serving the owners of these companies as they figure out how to deploy capital against assets that are living in the shadow of the city's life is what we do. So, we are an operating system for horizontal construction that touches every single part of building roads. But depending on which part you're in, we're either the tool that you use to send a message out to your fellow driver or the platform you're using to decide how to deploy capital for the next 4 years.
Yeah. So I think every founder, there's a lot of founders I see in this room, Dean. Every founder has to be just by nature an optimist, right? You have to be almost irrationally optimistic to start a business. And so, Sean, my question to you is, besides having bullet holes shot into your windows
Hold
at
on,
the
let me
early
get
office.
the right slide up on the screen. There we go. Yeah.
Can you just talk about the early days of the business and how you overcame probably a lot of doubt that maybe seeped into, hey, is this a great idea? I have to commit the next 5 to 10 years of my life to building this business. What was that early experience like?
Yeah. So a few short stories. So Nick sent me some ideas for the questions for this morning yesterday. And so I was thinking about this question and thinking about the abyss, right? That really rough spot in the third inning of your journey that's, past where you have some idea of where you're going, but very much before you figured out how to get there. And I remembered that sometime after the bullet story, but later that year, that was the real, the trough of the abyss. And so I went looking through Slack. It's a fun thing if you have a company and you've used Slack since day 0, because anything you've ever said, you can find. So I searched in Slack.
Depending on your definition of fun, yes.
Yeah. Well, right. Well, I'm gonna hold that thought. So I'm like, what did I call this? So I typed in hero. Funny aside, I wish I had pulled some quotes on this. Turns out, if you search for hero in your Slack, it's going to be guaranteed to generate some entertaining quotes that come from it. I'm not gonna mention those though now. So hero, it wasn't journey. I lived in Detroit for a while, so some references to some bad rock songs came up. But it was Abyss. It was actually Abyss that was what I had forgotten. So it was August 4th of 2018. I'm back in Kansas City. And I lived in Chicago at the time, but our biggest customer was in Kansas City. And it was very clear that our future was hinging on the success of this situation. So I'm in Kansas City. This is after the truckers rented out a conference room and held a rally and then shot up the office. So there was some drama. I'm a few months past that, and now we're at this pivotal point. And I remember being at this hotel late at night, that early day of August, and I wrote this post in Slack that I called Crossing the Abyss. And it went something like this, that in the moment things felt terrible because we had more responsibility than we really were capable of fulfilling each day. We were responsible for managing the logistics for the biggest road builder in that area of the country. The suppliers had gotten aggressive, as you heard before. And so the note was a bit of a rallying cry to just get through it. But the interesting part about this post is that the last third said, well, here's how I'm going to use my time to the team. And I said, it's clear that our present challenge operationally for the next 2 months, that we know what it is, and we know it's not going to be easy, and we know we have to get through it. But it was also clear that if we got through that 2-month operational challenge, and at the end of it hadn't actually sort of, not pivoted, but advanced to the future vision for the company, which was, instead of just managing logistics, providing a platform to optimize the entire job production problem, that we would fail. And so in this note, I said, so therefore, we have a good team, you know what the problem is, that part's clear. You're gonna focus on that, and I'm gonna sprint for the next 2 weeks with our technical team, or 2 months with the technical team, so that at the end of this, you've made it through operationally, and we've innovated in the areas that are gonna be the future of the company. I hadn't read that post in the 4 years since I had, or maybe I read it 2 years ago, so I hadn't read it in 2 years. And it was really interesting to look back on it, because now I'm speaking to you all, both as an LP and in shadow, in part due to the money that I've made off of XBE, and in part as the CEO of XBE. And that was exactly right. So what I wrote was right, that we needed to get through there. It was going to be to take everything we could to get through operationally. And if we innovated in this one area, that we probably would make it and thrive. And it turned out that was all true. You know, we did need to innovate in that area. That became what we were known for. Now we're like the Cadillac gold standard of how you run a road building business. And at the time, when we were sort of threatened with, maybe extinction if we couldn't figure it out operationally, we had to make some choices about how to use time. And so, long way to say that it would have been really easy to feel pretty dark in those days. I mean, I literally wrote Crossing the Abyss and sent it to the whole team. And, the only way to get through was to actually, spend all my time thinking about how great it was going to be to achieve what we ended up achieving, which is why we're here.
Yeah, love it. All right, so that's a great transition to get into a little bit more tactical aspects of how you built XBE and where it ended up. So Sean shared, we met each other on a street corner in Chicago. We actually were both running, and that became how we actually got to know each other. We would run in the morning together, and Sean would share kind of where he was with this company building, with operational aspects of the company, recruiting. I saw every piece of the functional area that he was thinking through. And I really always appreciated how strategic he was. He was very much 3 steps ahead at all points in time, and never got mired in the granular details that ultimately probably weren't going to matter in the success of the company. And so if you think back to your first $1 million in revenue that you collected as a business, can you share insights on what that process was like, both from a selling perspective and then a growth perspective? Like, how did you layer on new customers after the initial customers had signed on?
Yeah. This is how I got to our first $1 million. In the very early days, we were focused only on the logistics portion of the problem I described. That's the movement of materials into or out of quarries, into plants, out to job sites, back to dump sites, that flow. And I had been relatively successful in the logistics industry prior to XBE and found this, this niche in construction logistics that, shockingly to everyone in the room is underserved, right? There's not enough tech that had been deployed. It was pretty early on though, and I had a view for how to solve the problem given the past experience, but what I needed was some volume. Like I needed someone's transportation to manage. And I looked at what I had built, and while I was personally pretty credible at the time, the software platform was pretty nascent. We didn't have any experience, literally zero, as a company doing it. And so I looked at Teresa, my wife, and said, I got to find someone to gamble on us. So I put the word out to some folks I knew, including the CEO of Echo Global Logistics, Doug Wagner, who I had worked with previously, and said, I need not an early adopter. We're too early for early adopter. I need a gambler. I need someone that's going to bet. Not because they know better, but probably because they don't. And he said, craziest thing, I've been a CEO for 25 years in this business, and just yesterday morning, I met at an event over coffee this guy named Austin, and his father owns a paving contractor in Chicago. They don't own plants, they're a parking lot paver, but a pretty big one. He's like, I know nothing about the business. I've never had a conversation, to my knowledge, about paving in my entire life prior to yesterday and today. And he said, so anyways, I got Austin's business card. Why don't you give him a call? So I did. Austin's not a gambler. He's pretty, sort of looks like Nick, actually. Are you a gambler?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well.
I work in, by nature of my job title, right?
Good job. Right, so he looks like Nick, but apparently not like Nick. But Austin's dad is a gambler. And he still owned and somewhat operated that paving company. I flew out the next day to Chicago and sat down and went over sort of my hopes for the business. Now, what I didn't understand at the time is that they had put a bunch of money into an asset-based trucking company that had failed. And then they tried to convert it into a non-asset-based trucking brokerage that was failing. And, random guy walks in off the street and says, hey, how about you just gamble on me? And I think what they thought is, how in the world did we get so lucky that someone will take this problem and make it their whole business, given the state that they were in? But that's how the first $1 million happened. That one deal, which was, I think part the insight that I needed a gambler, I think that part was thought through. But then a little bit of networking and luck.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, so I'm diverging from our question list, so you might not have an image for this.
Hold on, I'll ask Dolly to make one. 1 second.
So, I think one of the things I've noticed that XBE does really well is focus, and knowing. To your point on knowing exactly who you're looking for to invest and become an early customer of the business. Also knowing how to build the product for that right persona. And I remember specifically, we grabbed coffee one day, and you were kind of telling me the two areas of the of your proposed operating system that would actually address a real problem and was a strong enough value prop for the end customer. Brokerage, dump truck brokerage, and then the full operating system where it's like Moneyball and they're buying into the full process. Anything in the middle wasn't going to work. And I think that level of strategic thinking and understanding of your customer, it takes a while to get there to understand that. You kind of have to tinker with different products and different use cases of the product. But do you mind just sharing how you thought about focusing and building the customer base?
Yeah, so I actually do have a slide for this, thank you. So this is how the second $1 million happens. So the first $1 million, again, that was about finding someone that would bet on us and we could ride that bet together. But to Nick's point, beyond that, all the rest of the success came from focusing on one thing, which is how do we make a bigger pie that we all can share? Like, what is standing between our customers and more profit? And there was a contract that we had with that Kansas City company, again, back to the abyss, where we were paid based on the amount that they saved in logistics expense, and we took a percentage of that. Common contract structure for a new company, for better and worse. And anyhow, so we were up and going, and we applied software. This is back on the logistics brokerage. We applied the software. We were running the process, handling, I think, the transportation management pretty effectively. And I looked at what we were going to make off, or what they were going to save, and therefore what we were going to make. And it wasn't enough. We probably could have stayed alive, but it wasn't enough to fund anything interesting. And this was between April and August of 2018. And I remember at the time saying, okay, I've got to stop thinking about myself and how it is that we can provide a logistics brokerage platform that can make them more money, and just look at their problem. Do they actually not have more money to make? Is that the problem? Or is it that I'm thinking too small? And as soon as I started looking at it that way, it became clear that for every $1 that they were wasting because they were poor at logistics, there were $4 or $5 that they were wasting related to logistics because they were bad planners. So we were downstream from their planning activity. And every day we would dispatch the work out to build the city streets, and things wouldn't go as they, as we expected. And I dig into it more, and it turned out they just weren't thinking about it enough. And so our entire thesis became, if we can get them to think more, if we can pull forward the thinking that doesn't really happen until after the fact, then they will make smarter resource balancing decisions, and ultimately that will lead to less trucking waste, and we will make money. And that sort of singular focus on solving not the position they had taken, which is like, hey, help me with my truck execution, but their interest, which is how do we actually make more money by balancing resources. And I think having the, guts, I guess, to believe that we could solve the whole thing. Because there was the reason we were in the BIS before is that the gap between we're going to manage logistics and we are going to provide an operating system upon which the entire business runs, there's a little bit of a chasm there.
Right.
And I just thought that it was death between, so just had to go for it.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
So you're what we call a technical founder, meaning that you write code and also run the business. Can you, KP's opening remarks, that is definitely in the sweet spot of our investment thesis. We love funding technical founders. We're funding technology businesses at its core, and we think most founders should have some area of expertise in the code that they're writing and the technology they're building. But oftentimes, entirely different skill sets, right? So running the business, recruiting, sales, and then actually sitting down and finding time to write code, architecting in a very thoughtful way. How have you accomplished serving both sides in needs of the business?
So I think a lot of technical founders started technical and then became founders. That's, I don't know what percentage, but it would seem to me to be most. I went the other direction. So I was a business guy, for lack of a better way to say this, first, and learned, and then became the technical later. And just, I won't give you my resume, but just as one example, so I was Chief Procurement Officer of a Fortune 500 company for a while, head of strategy for two public companies, one Fortune 500, before I had ever written a line of code that would be considered professional, at least. And so I've been asked a million times by everyone I know, why in the world at that point when, I'd sort of made it to some degree, at least professionally, would I take the time to learn to program? And one of the reasons I made these slides the way that I did is to tell this story. So, you're going to make money, you're going to do amazing things through leverage, and that's the only way you can. And there are only a few types of, classes of asset that you can leverage. You can leverage capital, and I wasn't poor, but I didn't have enough capital to leverage. You can leverage people, but as you can imagine, running big parts of Fortune 500 companies that, that involves some trade-offs. You have to make some deals that I didn't love. Or you can leverage the machines, the robots. And that sure seemed attractive to me by the time I was sort of in my, sailing along in my business career, because that felt like a thing that I had access to, if only I could program. And so the start for me came from the demand side, not the supply side. Like, I had a desire to be technical. And, obviously, given the way the rest of the story goes, I had the aptitude, but it was really the desire that did it. And the reason I made these slides this way was to make this point, which is, so all of these illustrations were created last night between the hours of 10 p.m. and 12 p.m. here by Dolly, the magical artificial intelligence illustrator, based on the questions that Nick sent in my thinking about what stories I would tell. And they're amazing, right? I mean, they're abstract, but they illustrate the points. They're beautiful. The symbolism, I don't have to have any notes, and I can rattle off the stories just by looking at the symbols. That's what art is. And that idea of being able to leverage the machine to take my ideas and make them something more, I found, I think you're not supposed to say this word in 2022, but addictive. Like, I was completely addicted to the idea that I could get the machines to help me out. And so it's a long way to say that, I don't really actually personally understand the focus people have on the anxiety people have around, should technical founders be spending time coding? Are they wasting their time? My point of view is, the founders should be doing, the leaders should be doing the highest leverage activities. And what exactly is more high leverage than commanding an army of robots to take my ideas and make them real? Is it really more high leverage to command the 7 people that work for my company at the time? It doesn't sound higher leverage to me. And so I don't really think about it in terms of, should I spend time with customers or spend time with team members or spend time coding? I just ask the question, how do I create leverage?
Yeah.
And a lot of the time that's coding.
All right, so let's move forward to the exciting part that we're all here to actually.
Wait, that wasn't the exciting?
No. Teaching robots what to do. That's not exciting. We're all interested on behalf of the venture capital firm that I represent, and that you guys are here as part of the community. We're interested in making money. Tell us about selling the business and what that process was like.
Yeah, so I'm telling a couple phases. So I've sold the company a couple times now, which meant that I bought it in between. So we can talk about either side, which is always fun. Let me find my starting story here. I want to say I bought it twice, sold it twice, and now I'm somewhere in between. So in the very early days, I had considered partnering with a guy that knew construction to do the business. I didn't. I knew logistics. I knew this software side, knew strategy, but I had never worked in construction literally a day in my life in any way. And so I had partnered up, or thought about at least partnering up with someone who ended up being pretty difficult. And I'll spare the details. But somewhere around 6 months into the effort, we end up in a lawsuit, which is not exactly my vibe, by the way. So I'm not the ends up in a lawsuit guy, at least by identity. But nonetheless, there we are, and I'll get to the selling side. Don't worry. I didn't know what to do. I had taken the money and time that I had, and I had poured it into starting this thing. The whole reason we ended up in the lawsuit is because he knew that and knew I had sort of exhausted my resources, and he was a little opportunistic. Again, I had not worked in construction prior, so I was unfamiliar with the type, but now I know they exist. And anyhow, so we get going, and I didn't know what the heck to do because it looked like the work that I had put in and the money that I put in, I was going to lose. And so I considered the first time buying the company before I sold it, is I went to a divorce lawyer that I knew in Avon, Connecticut, a divorce lawyer. And I said, Ed, I know you're going to say no, but hear me out. I need you to take on contingency this case because I'm in the right. And I've put together 10,000 words of backup because it's bulletproof. And I know you've never literally done this, but I don't know who else to go to that's admitted in Connecticut that could defend me in this situation. And so just do this. I will cash in all of the equity of our friendship for you to read this 10,000 words. And if at the end you make the decision about if you'll help me out, and if you do, I will give you the following in terms of cash and other considerations when I get ownership. I defend my ownership in what this is. And he did it. So this divorce lawyer had never done anything but like custody battles and divorces, ends up going in and does it all in contingency. And that's how I sort of acquired the business in my mind. Because right when it was nascent, before it was even a thing that was interesting, I had to fight just to own any of it. The problem is that really took it out of me. It took it out of me from a energy standpoint. Emotionally, it was kind of hard. It was financially very difficult. I lost a bunch of time. And so the first time I sold it was I sold most of it to this guy. Not all, but a lot. More than you guys would think was reasonable. But you know what? I've got 5 kids and I'm married and I've got responsibilities, and I said, well, I've got a vision for what I want this to be, but the only way I can responsibly pursue it is to get a little bit of cash to get through this. And so that's the first time I sold it. Then I bought most of it back from him once we had gotten it far enough off the ground, and I had worked with some bigger customers to build bigger pies. And from then we built it up, and things have gone great for the years since then. And then a couple years ago, I looked at, it was in the pandemic, I looked how just much things had changed. I still had 5 kids. And I thought about how much risk I had subjected my family to. Like a lot of risk. And I don't know why. There's something about the pandemic that bothered me. And so I put this at the end. I said, hey, I can sell, again, not all of it, but I can sell back at this point a large portion of it to some of the people I've mentioned. And while I didn't really want to, I thought it was responsible for my family to do it. And so I did. Now, the irony being that it was really not the right time to do that. Since then, the value of XBE has gone up another probably 5 times. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So they call it founder's journey, not like investor's excellence. But every time, the reason I put this up there is every time I think about how maybe I got the timing of that wrong, I think about how I've got more money than I need, for one, and for two, I was making a risk-based decision for my family, which felt right. Which is a long way to say, don't have me making decisions about when to sell things entirely, unless you're thinking about your own family, in which case I'm happy to consult.
So I think, I don't know, how are we doing on time? Got it. So we've, my question is what mistakes were made as a founder. I think you've covered many of those.
Right.
Are there any glaring mistakes that when you, just going through your experience and now being involved in the shadow community, seeing more companies, especially at the early stage, what are the most glaring mistakes that you see being made in the market?
Yeah, and I mean, for what it's worth, I don't actually think that the sales stuff was a big mistake. I'm contractually obligated to answer it this way from family members. And here's why I think that. Like, you know, I've been focused, 99% of my time has been focused on creating value for customers. If you create value for customers, then, you know, there's plenty of money to go around. And the degree to which I didn't capture, you know, however many tens of millions of dollars that I left on the table in the exact structuring, that money went to risk management and went to people that I was creating value for also. And so I don't actually have a lot of regrets about that. It's just fun to say in a group like this. In terms of other mistakes, I think a couple. One, let's see where it was. So one is this. So in my own head, I am an exceedingly positive person. Like, I'm optimistic, I don't have much negativity, I sort of approach every day somewhat similarly. But I have learned that the experience of working with me is not necessarily that breezy. You know, as it is for me. Like, in my mind, I'm breezy. And it turns out what other people think about this matters more than my own identity. And so that's why I made this guy. I believe that my job is to be a cheerleader for people. It's much more a fundamental part of my job than I think I had accepted prior to the last 18 months. That, you know, the fact that I am not really all that stressed usually, and that I usually feel very optimistic and positive, is not something to hoard. You know, it's not like a thing that I should just keep to myself and benefit from, but it's something I should gift to others, the whole team. You know, help them feel that way all day, instead of using that confidence to them, like, work harder, which just creates stress for them. So I think that that's the number one thing, which is, like, how do I make, like, I think about pressure versus, like, lubrication. I don't want to provide any pressure. I want to lubricate the gears. I want to make things easy, make things smooth. I didn't used to think that way. I used to think about that maybe internally, but not for others. And I think that was a mistake, and I think you know, I'm working on it, but trying hard. Related to that, I try to say yes as many times as I can every day. And I also don't think that I got this right either. You know, that the amount of momentum and goodwill that's built up by just saying yes when someone asks for something. Like, I was just hired a VP of marketing last night, as an aside, which is very exciting. And I am the most chronically terrible undermarketer that exists. So this is a big deal for me personally. And anyways, I've been working on this say yes to everything deal, and she listed out what you know, what she wanted in the job and part of the compensation and some terms and the rest. She sent that to me in a note, and I just wrote back, sure. Just took it all. You know, because the difference between that and what she would have said yes to just didn't matter in the big scheme of things. And the goodwill that's created by just saying yes to people when they have thought through things is enormous. And so I think that I believed previously that I had some sort of obligation to you know, get every dollar that I could. And, you know, I don't see it that way anymore. You know, I see that every dollar that I didn't take for myself, as long as it builds equity, that's an asset, that's leverage. And so saying yes is that's my 2022 vibe.
Love it.
Yeah, so I think those are my two biggest mistakes.
Beautiful. Well, just so everyone knows, Sean is in the early days of his next company. We won't get into the details of it quite yet. I don't think he's ready to reveal it. But if there's any investors in the room, talk to Sean. Obviously, he knows what he's doing, and I don't know, Shadow might have some interest in that. So, Sean, really appreciate you flying to Asheville to share your story. A lot of compelling insights. Thank you for putting together the beautiful visuals too, and spending time on it. Round of applause.
Hey, thanks.